Welcome. Welcome to another exciting Rockjumper virtual tour, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Nikki, and it's an honor to co-host today's webinar together with our USA manager, George Armistead. Today we are traveling to the fourth largest island, Madagascar, where the flora and fauna are extremely unique and have evolved over millions of years in isolation. The island alone has 4 endemic bird families and a further 2 that are shared with only the Comoros, while also boasting over 100 species of different lemurs, for which the country is probably most famous for. The marvels of Madagascar, however, extend well beyond its avian gems, and the island also plays host to an exceptional diversity of lizards, snakes, chameleons, frogs, and crazy insects. Greg de Klerk is our guest speaker today, taking us on a thrilling voyage to Madagascar. He has been expertly leading tours to Madagascar for multiple years now. And when not out guiding, he is also a wildlife and bird photographer. And today's virtual tour is testament to his love for wildlife, birding, photography, and Madagascar. Before I hand over to you, Greg, there's a special little mention I would like to send out to your son, Jason, who turned 2 on the 20th of November. Happy birthday, big guy. Your daddy tells me you have just discovered your vocal cords. Over to you, Greg, and thank you for taking us to Madagascar.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome to Madagascar, the incredible 8th continent. The Madagascar island is the 4th largest island after Greenland, New Guinea, and Borneo. Based approximately 360 kilometers, or about 225 miles from mainland Africa across the Mozambican Channel, the island has been here for the last 120 million years. It covers a total surface area of 587,295 kilometers squared, or roughly 226,756 miles squared. And the capital of Antananarivo sits right in the middle of the island on the central plateau. The island itself can be separated into 3 geographical zones. The eastern coastal strip, which reaches up to between 200 and 600 meters above sea level, and that's about 1,000 to 2,000 feet. It is on the windward side of the island and therefore receives the highest rainfall. In fact, rainfall has been recorded up to 3,800 millimeters, or 150 inches annually, around an area close to Massawa. The whole east coast is remnant of evergreen and deciduous forest, and also with patches of tropical rainforest. We then move across into the central plateau, which unfortunately has been heavily degraded, and as a result, it is now covered in prairie grassland. Unfortunately, the trade winds coming off the Eastern Ocean have to go up and over the escarpment, and therefore rainfall is not particularly good. They mainly get drizzle and mist, although in the rainy season they still get 1,200 millimeters of rain, or roughly about 50 inches in Antananarivo, the capital. Further than that, we go across to the western plateau and the lowlands, and that falls into a dry rain shadow. It's almost desert-like across that western side of the island, and this is exacerbated by cold currents flowing down the Mozambican Channel. They receive a very low rainfall of about 360 millimeters, or about 14 inches, or less from Tulia south. We'll head down to Tulia a bit later. Basically, the whole area, the south and southwest, is set up of scattered spiny forest and drought-resistant vegetation. All these environments are under extreme pressure because the surrounding communities are extremely impoverished. There's no sustainable habitat use, unfortunately, and with rapid deforestation, wetland conversions, and the associated environmental impact that this has from these practices, it is having a detrimental effect on the habitats and their inhabitants. So Madagascar itself, according to IOC taxonomy, has 310 species on the island of bird. There are 108 endemic bird species and 2 breeding endemics, and 38 globally threatened species. For those that use Clements, it's pretty much the same, except that Clements only recognizes 309 species. The species of importance that we'll get here, a monotypic species first up, the cuckoo roller, belonging to the family Leprosomidae. These guys are actually quite closely related to trogons. Then the next family is an endemic family to Madagascar, the Mesites. There are 3 of them, the white-breasted, the brown, and also the sub-desert Mesite, and they belong to the family Mesit-Ornithidae. Then there are 4 ascites, which are also an endemic bird family. The 4 species are the common sunbird, the velvet, the yellow-bellied sunbird, and the Schlegel's ascite, and they belong to the family Philippidae, and they are closely related to the Asian broadbills. Then there are 5 ground rollers, 4 of which occur only on that eastern shoreline, and 1 which occurs on the western shoreline. They belong to the family Brachyptericidae. Then we have 7 owls, 11 Malagasy warblers belonging to the family Bernieridae. These guys are quite distinctive. They are found only on Madagascar, and all their little adaptations to feed in their habitats are only found in these birds and no others in the world. The raptors, there are 16 of those, and then the vangers, well, there are 21 of those. The mammals are no less different or impressive. There are approximately 241 species dependent on the recent phylogenetic updates and discoveries. Of all the 148 native terrestrial species, they are all endemic. There are 5 major mammal groups represented here: the bats, the tenrecs, the rats and mice, the herpestin-like carnivores, and of course the lemurs. Our birding for the tour starts around Antananarivo. From our guest house close to the airport, we have an opportunity to connect with a few very common species. First up, the Malagasy bulbul. He's a conspicuous and noisy resident in the area. They often join mixed feeding parties and are widespread through all habitats in Madagascar. And they also occur in the Comoros, the Seychelles, and the Mayotte Island. The Madagascan wagtail, often associated with water bodies. In fact, at one of the guest houses we stay at in the capital, we have them nesting in the garden, often eating insects around the green lawns. The Malagasy white-eye is widespread, including the Seychelles and the Comoros and their surrounding islands, and is often found in small family groups, feeding on insects and also fruits. And then the Suimanga sunbird, another widespread individual across Madagascar. They're also distributed through to the Seychelles, and as the beak would suggest, they are nectar feeders. We then go across to a very important lake in the center of the city called Lake Alarobia, beg your pardon. It's a 10.4 hectare Ramsar site and is the only highland site in the country which hosts the Malagasy pond heron. It is also inhabited by 2 endangered species, the Meller's duck and the Madagascan grebe. First up on the list, though, spelled Fodi, the local pronunciation would be Fudi. This is a particular male in breeding plumage. They're widespread across Madagascar. Rarely, though, do they go into forests, and they're often in flocks of up to 100 birds at good feeding areas. The Malagasy kestrel is the most common bird of prey throughout Madagascar. Their distribution includes the Seychelles to the north, and they feed from the perch, often hunting things like small reptiles and insects. Then, of course, the star of the show at Lake Alarobia is the Malagasy pond heron. They are endangered, and a population estimate of between 1,300 birds and 4,000 birds is left. They've had a dramatic decline in the last 50 years, and this decline is continuing. They are distributed across Madagascar and the surrounding islands and the Seychelles, and they winter in East Africa. In fact, they had one in South Africa a year and a half ago. Then we move on to the white-throated rail, another individual that is distributed across Madagascar and also into the Seychelles. They inhabit a wide range of habitats, but we often get them on the edge of wetlands and also on the edge of streams with wooded surroundings. They feed on invertebrates, and they've even been known to glean parasites off of the carapace of tortoises. In saltwater areas, so along the coast, they're also known to drink salt water. Then the first of the endangered species, the Meller's duck. The Meller's duck is endemic to Madagascar, and they estimate that there's only 1,300 to 3,300 individuals left. The decline in the population is due to hunting and poaching. There is a captive breeding program that has shown promise, with 230 birds bred out of a stock of 13 wild-caught birds back in the late 90s. And then one of the common species we're likely to encounter the whole way through the tour is the common jerry, a widespread Madagascan endemic. Insects form the majority of its diet, and they're often central in mixed feeding flocks, mixed species flocks. From Antananarivo, the next morning, we make our way towards Perine. On the road to Perine, you can see it's a nice twisty road. We go out of the highlands and make our way down the escarpment into the rainforests. Unfortunately, along the way, there's not a lot of birding to be done because most of it has been taken over by subsistence farms. And in 90% of those cases, it is rice paddies that have been formed in these areas. Rice is the main produce and main export of Madagascar, and often planted on these terraces with rice are other subsistence crops like cassava and corn, along with sweet potatoes. But once we enter these areas, we still can find something like the monotypic hamerkop, which is often found feeding on amphibians and crustaceans as they move into the wetland areas. The masquerade martin is often seen flying over these wetlands with other swifts and swallows, even though some of them go through to East Africa during their winter. Some still stay behind. And the Madagascan stone chat. These guys are often on the side of the road, going down to hawk insects from their small shrubby bits of habitat along the side of the road, often in couples or singly. And then we stop at a patch called the Manguru River. And here we'll be looking for these guys, the Madagascan pratincoal. They are vulnerable, and their population estimate of between 5,000 and 10,000 birds are left. They're distributed across Madagascar, except in the extreme south and southwest, where it's exceptionally dry. And these guys will take a migration across to East Africa in winter. At about lunchtime, we'll arrive at our residence in the area of Perine. As you can see here, this is looking out from the deck of one of the lodges we stay at. It overlooks a wonderful forest lake with primary forest up the right-hand side of the screen. Of course, while you're at lunch with primary forest around, you can expect bird parties, a major part of your rainforest birding. And here we expect to see common Newtonia. He is endemic as well to Madagascar and in a variety of forests. And he is part of the Vanga family. They are frequent members of mixed flocks, as are most of these species we will now see, including the Madagascan cuckoo shrike. He also is found in a variety of forests, and he feeds on a variety of invertebrates, often accompanying other birds in their flocks. The first of our major vangas, the red-tailed vanga, is restricted to the eastern forests. Now, these guys are often found moving up in front with all these other bird species in these feeding flocks, picking off little insects in the undergrowth. An individual that is not as prevalent is often seen just off the edges of the flock is a Ward's flycatcher. You'll often see him flying off of an exposed perch like a paradise flycatcher would do, sallying to get an insect as he moves. And then one of the stunners, a blue vanga. Now, of the vangas, he is the only one that does not stay solely on Madagascar. He goes all the way through to the Comoros. Sorry, beg your pardon. He leaves and goes all the way through to the Comoros, and he inhabits deciduous, dry, and evergreen forests. And he feeds on arthropods and berries, but very much like a parrot, he hangs upside down using his feet to grip onto branches while he picks off insects and things. They estimate that about 90% of the time, this guy is involved in feeding groups. And then also at the lodge, we are very lucky occasionally to see Madagascan starling. They're endemic to the eastern coastline. They favor humid regions and woodland, and they'll be looking for fruit, insects, and nectar in the surrounding vegetation, but they don't really join bird parties. However, you may find a flock of these birds of up to about 20 individuals. After lunch, we'll head off to Ana Lamazotra Special Reserve, otherwise known as the Andesibe Mantadia National Park. It occurs between 800 and 1,400 meters above sea level, about 2,624 to 4,593 feet. Annually, they receive less than 1,500 millimeters of rain. And the average canopy height, as you'll see in the next image, is roughly between 20 and 25 meters high, about 65 to 82 feet. One of the common species of mammal that we're going to encounter in these areas, he's encountered all over the island, is a brown lemur. The common brown lemur is the most common species and lives in groups of up to 12 individuals. They are diurnal, spending the majority of the time in the canopy feeding on a variety of leaves, buds, fruits, and flowers. You also get them in the gardens of each of your lodges that you go to. Up in the trees at the entrance of the reserve, often exposed on an open perch, are Madagascan blue pigeons. They're also found in the northern part of Madagascar, but they go down to the east. They favor undisturbed rainforest, and they generally tend to eat fruit, but if there is anything else, they don't know yet because they're still studying the species. They generally feed in pairs, but can be found in groups of up to 12 birds. The rainforest scopsal is something that we go looking for. It's one of our targets here. The bird itself is completely nocturnal, but the local guides often know roosting spots, day roosting spots. And in this case, he was on the edge of a pandanus tree with some overhanging vegetation. They tend to come out at night only and catch a few insects and a few small vertebrates. Another species that is also nocturnal, we often find them on a day roost at the base of pandanus trees on the collared nightjars. They are endemic to north and eastern Madagascar. The strange thing about these collared nightjars is that they have no call that has ever been recorded or heard. So we have to find them on a roost spot, which can be quite challenging, particularly if they found them and they've been flushed a little bit earlier. Then a special species of this area, it's what everyone comes to this reserve for. This is the indri. It is endemic to eastern Madagascar. It is the largest surviving prosimian and is strictly diurnal. In fact, they only really get active from about 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, they live in small family groups of up to 6 individuals, where the female is completely dominant over the male, particularly at feeding sites. And they also begin calling to let everyone know where they are in the forest so that the groups can socially and space themselves out well. I'm going to just play the call. If you listen carefully, it'll come through. Fantastic call from that animal. The next species is the Madagascar ibis, and these guys are now regarded as near threatened. Now, although the numbers in the population are good, their habitat is rapidly vanishing, and they're also being hunted, which is a significant cause of the decline. They occur in a variety of woodland and forest, but they particularly favor damp areas with deep leaf litter along streams. The species is dependent on remote touch. So they've got a sensory organ that has honeycomb pits that can feel the vibrations of earthworms and species moving, and they can dig them up. Another fantastic bird in the area is the blue koa. He is a denizen of the primary forest, and he does not go into dry forest at all. He feeds on a wide variety of arthropods and vertebrates, and also plant materials. And generally, he's found individually. He may follow diurnal lemurs, and he sometimes also joins mixed species flocks to find insects. The next sifaka that we come across is a diademmed sifaka. They are absolutely beautiful. They're diurnal and they're completely arboreal, very rarely coming down onto the ground unless they're looking for fungus or they're coming down to play wrestle. Their primary diet is immature leaves, and they're often in groups of up to 8 individuals. The Madagascar wood rail is another Madagascan endemic found in the undergrowth, and he can be quite difficult to see. In fact, I've had tours where he just shoots across a pathway and other tours where he displays beautifully in the road in front of you. It depends on your luck. They require undisturbed forest habitat with water sources and very sparse ground cover. The Nellicorvi weaver is next up. There are one of two weavers in the process family that you get on the island. And these guys feed on a variety of arthropods and are often associated with birding flocks. Now, one of the species that is a great example of the radiation of these species across the island is a nuthatch fango. They are a restricted range species only to eastern Madagascar in the rainforests, but their foraging behavior resembles that of the European nuthatches. They literally hop up and around the branch on their way up. The thing that distinguishes them from the European nuthatches is that they can only ascend, whereas the nuthatches can descend a tree. They are almost always associated with mixed species flocks. Now you have to look carefully at this image. This is a fantastic piece of cryptic camouflage from a giant mossy leaf-tailed gecko. You'll see his head towards the bottom of the screen, just above the leaf, and his tail almost touching the top of the screen. They were only elevated to species level in 2006, and they are completely nocturnal and omnivorous. When at rest, they hide themselves against the tree like this during the day. This is a forest foodie. These guys take the place of the red foodie in the forests, normally in groups of up to 15 individuals, sometimes joining feeding flocks as they forage for seeds, insects, and nectar. This is a crossleaf vanga. It's a species that was regarded as being a babbler at one point. They're endemic to humid forest along Madagascar's east. They are terrestrial in habit, always down along the floor or just above the ground, grabbing insects and bits and pieces along the way. A fantastic little bird, a great call as well. We then see one of the smaller lemurs, an eastern bamboo lemur. Now these guys are endemic as well to the forests on the east, where there's bamboo and bamboo vines available. They are diurnal in groups of 7, and they feed entirely on bamboo. As our afternoon draws to an end, we may get lucky and see a Madagascan owl. And they are also endemic. They inhabit evergreen forest, dry deciduous or gallery forest. They're strictly nocturnal, and during the day they roost in dense vegetation. They are most commonly encountered in the east. After dinner, we often partake in a night walk. Madagascar has 50 of the world's 85 chameleons, and this is the best time to see them because their body reflects light with a slight white sheen. Madagascar is home to the largest and smallest chameleons, and in this case, we're looking at the largest chameleon in terms of weight. This is the Parsons chameleon. They are limited to eastern Madagascar, and they weigh 700 grams and up. In other words, 24 ounces upwards for a mature adult. And they also get to about 60 centimeters or 23 inches in length at maturity. We may also encounter an odd frog here and there, and this is a green bright-eyed frog. Males call at night about 1 to 2 meters above the ground near slow-moving streams. Early the next morning, about 4 a.m., we depart our camp and head through to Mantadia National Park. Great primary forest going up into ridges, as you can see in the background. And our first target here is Madagascan swamp warbler, another endemic that occurs in all types of freshwater habitats, especially slow-flowing and stagnant waters. If we're incredibly lucky, we may come across the vulnerable Madagascan rail. They're becoming rare throughout their range and in sedges, and they feed on a variety of invertebrates. The lesser Vasa parrot, there are 2 species of Vasa parrots. They look very similar. This is the lesser with a slightly smaller head. They only occur generally in the rainforests, although we do get them occasionally in the drier and more arid environments. You may also see them in the Comoros and the Seychelles, but they really like waterlogged forests. And here they feed on fruits, berries, seeds, and flowers. And when they nest in cavities, and they may share that cavity with tenrecs, rather interestingly. The Madagascan buzzard is one of the most common buzzards you will see, one of the most common raptors, in fact. They are prevalent in all woodland habitats, but are absent from the deforested central plateau. They actively hunt small vertebrates, and they do this from the perch, and they spend much time soaring over their range. Rand's warbler is a bird that we see sitting right on the top of the canopy and often calling. They are canopy feeders and often move with mixed feeding flocks. As is this guy, a green jerry, another canopy feeder, which joins into small mixed species flocks. And then we'll get distracted by this little chap. This is a Madagascan flufftail. Now, flufftails are notoriously hard to see. These guys call normally quite close to the side of the road, and they favor forest edges and undisturbed clearings. And they seem to have a really high tolerance for their habitat type. Well, it is still a skulking and secretive flufftail. However, it's probably one of the easiest flufftails to see. The Madagascan harrier hawk is almost always present around the forests. They're widespread over all woodlands. They tend to insert their head and legs into a cavity to pull out things like roosting lemurs and nesting birds. And they're probably one of the 5 most common of the raptors we will see. The red-fronted kua, again, kuas belonging to the kukul family. He is also restricted to north and eastern Madagascar, but he's pretty common where he's found. He likes undisturbed rainforest, and he's terrestrial, seeking out arthropods, lizards, fruits, and seeds. Spectacled tetrakas are a member of the Bernieridae family. They are residents in primary evergreen forests and are gregarious. Up to 20 individuals may be in a mixed species feeding flock, also looking for insects and arthropods. One of my favorites, the white-throated oxaladus. They are endemic to northwest and eastern Madagascar. They're resident in the understory. They love being almost on the ground in very thick vegetation, and they feed on a variety of arthropods in groups of 4. They may join rodents moving through the undergrowth because they might disturb insects. This little guy is a striped day gecko. They're part of the Pelsuma family, which is, Pelsuma genus, which is a massive genus. They're active during the day. The females have endolymphatic glands on the base of the neck, and these store calcium for them for egg production. You'll often see them sitting on top of pandanus leaves. They're also arboreal. The Madagascan cuckoo, he's there during summer, and then he comes across to East Africa in winter, so we sometimes don't see him. He is relatively common when he's around, and he might occasionally join the mixed species flocks. But generally speaking, they don't like him very much because he's a brood parasite to about 10 species. Madagascar cisticola, common jerry, Malagasy paradise flycatcher, for example, he'll lay his eggs in their nest. This is a special of the east in those deep rainforests. It's a dark Newtonia restricted to the dense understory, where they might pop up and allow you to see them, and they're little insectivores. Then we come across lowland streaked tenrecs. These guys are endemic and restricted to the rainforests of eastern Madagascar. Their coloration is cryptic because they spend a lot of time in the leaf mat on the floor looking for soft-bodied invertebrates, something which their dentition is specifically designed for. They may forage together or in small groups with other families, and they communicate at close proximity through stridulating those quills across the back. So they basically vibrate the quills. Like a porcupine, those quills are loose-fitting. So if a predator comes up and grabs them, or an unsuspecting human, those quills will just stick out and jab themselves into the person's skin. One of my favorites, the Madagascan pygmy kingfisher, is found in a variety of forest and dry scrub. They are not water dependent. However, they'll get most of their water requirements from frogs, arthropods, and vertebrates. The first of the specials, the short-legged ground roller. Now, these guys are the only ground roller that is predominantly arboreal, off the ground. He nests in trees, he feeds in the canopy of trees, and during the day, moving down to the bottom. They are vulnerable. The population estimate is between 1,500 and 7,000 individuals, but they believe that the population may be higher because they are often overlooked and quite easily missed. They are restricted to the eastern rainforests, and they are exclusively found in undisturbed dark patches of forest. They mainly feed on invertebrates, occasionally taking small vertebrates. Then one of Madagascar's major mammals, it's the biggest mammal, the fossa. These guys are widely but sparsely distributed throughout Madagascar. They are adapted to general arboreal living. They've got a long tail which allows them to balance, extended pads on the paws, and semi-retractile claws, and also reversible ankles. Now, these are all cat-like traits, and it is a great example of the divergent evolution because there are no cats on the island, and these guys have taken up that particular role. They are incredibly agile on both land and in trees, but they're predominantly nocturnal, so you don't see them very often. They do tend to hunt lemurs though, and about 50% of their diet is made up of lemurs. The red-breasted cur is another really special species of this eastern forest. They are shy and quite easily overlooked as they forage on the ground looking for berries, seeds, fruits, and insects. Then we come across another lemur. This is the black and white ruffed lemur, quite a handsome chap. They are exclusively diurnal and are found right in the canopy of the trees. They feed mainly on fruit and small quantities of leaves. And they will take nectar when it's available. In fact, they've become a rather specialist nectar feeder with the traveler's palm or traveler's tree. And in this case, the flower structure has developed specifically to work with their feeding habits. And in response to that, they are a major pollinator of that tree. The next ground roller is the pitta-like ground roller. He is beautiful. They are the second smallest member of the family, and they are thought to be the commonest member as well. They are found in the lowland and high altitudinal undisturbed rainforest, and they prefer the dense herb layer with plentiful dead wood where they can go and probe to find their food sources, and they're almost entirely terrestrial. So this little guy is really interesting, a Barron's mantella. He's a small frog found throughout eastern Madagascar, basically in all the rainforests, and they can't grasp their mate like other frogs would to mate. They're called amplexus. So it's a very special design. The female instead will lay her eggs on the ground, and when rain comes, it'll be close to water, and the eggs will be washed off into the water where the tadpoles can hatch. They are active diurnal foragers, taking arthropods and ants and a couple of other small creatures. But the thing is, they have alkaloid concentrations that are really high in their body, they believe, from eating these ants, and that makes them toxic, hence the very bright coloring known as apismatic coloring on its body. The next endemic family that we'll find is a common sunbird, Asceti. Now, this guy is found on the eastern coastline in the eastern forests. They tend to be in the canopy of primary forest, and they're primarily nectar feeders, targeting pink, red, and white flowers, and also taking insects. The scaly ground rollers, and another of the ground rollers, he is almost completely terrestrial as well. The incredible thing is that he is the second largest in the ground roller family, and they're also vulnerable. The species itself likes undisturbed area with large trees, but he prefers dense, tangled thickets. The general scene within these rainforests are these nice undisturbed lakes with emergent vegetation, and they are home to the Madagascan grebe, the endangered species. There are fewer than 2,500 of them left in the world, and they occur on both temporary and permanent water bodies, preferring shallower pools with that emergent aquatic vegetation, and they feed on small fish and aquatic creatures. We then make our way out of Mantadia and go through to the Torofutsi wetlands, where we may encounter the grey emu tail. You can see the tail broken up. There's no barbing on the tail, hence the name, very much like the emu's feathers. They are endemic to eastern Madagascar, liking montane grassland and heathland, and they are shy and skulking, like a typical mouse going through the vegetation, catching insects. The Madagascan cisticola, pretty much widespread in a wide variety of habitats, but you'll find them in denser grasses and shrubs. They tend to feed primarily on insects, either singly or in small family groups. There we come across these on another night walk. This is the nose-horned chameleon. He's about the size of half my finger. He's a tiny little guy. He's one of the smallest ones you'll find. If we're fortunate, we also come across Goodman's mouse lemur. They are range-restricted endemics to the rainforests of Andasiba and Mantadia National Park. They were only recently discovered in 2005, so there's not much more information on them, and we get quite lucky seeing them. This is a brown leaf chameleon, part of the Bruchisia family, and it is the sister to the smallest chameleon in Madagascar, the minute leaf chameleon, which measures only 3.5 centimeters, so basically the size of my thumb. We then leave that area of Madagascar, head back to Tana, and then we fly down and through to Barenti in the far southeastern side of the island. All right. Now, Barenti is rather interesting. you'll notice that we land in Fort Dauphin and then we travel inland. At Fort Dauphin, we're often lucky to find modest day gecko right at the airport, another one of the Pelsumas. And then we encounter this simoon-like landscape, the Barenti Road. It hasn't been surfaced for over 50 years since it was built, and it is quite a challenge. Normally about a 4.5 hour drive through to our lodging. In fact, we have gone so slow on this road that we are in one tour. I was passed by a cyclist, and the only reason we passed him was because he had got tired and stopped to have a drink of water on the side of the road. Now, dependent on the logistics, Madagascar's logistics can be quite challenging. If we have to overnight in Fort Dauphin, we can visit Ando-Hehela National Park. It's quite a difficult park to navigate through, but if we do get the chance, we can chase the red-tailed Newtonia. It is a vulnerable species, and it only occurs in lowland humid evergreen forests. There were no sightings of the species between 1931 and 1989, and then suddenly there was a realization. A light bulb clicked, and they figured out that they were a canopy dweller and were often overlooked with mixed feeding flocks moving through the tree. As we get closer to Barenti, we'll come across sisal plantations, massive amounts of them. Madagascar exports about 20,000 tons annually. Getting into Barenti itself, we'll start to encounter birds like the greater Vasa parrot, who are found in Madagascar and also in the Comoros. They are present in a host of forests and have less of a restriction on them compared to their cousin, the lesser Vasa. They feed on fruits, berries, and seeds, and are even capable of eating maize off of the stalk, and they nest in baobabs. The spiny forest, octopus bushes, also known as the Didieria, they are part of the spiny forest, which is restricted to southwest Madagascar. About 95% of the plant species are endemic to the region. The octopus trees, mixed euphorbia and baobab species dominate. And these guys, the Didieria, they have similar adaptations to cactuses. The fleshy leaves, spines, but they have the woody stem, which obviously cactuses don't. The soil is very porous, and rainfall in this area is about 500 mils or 19 inches on average. It's a great example of habitat. Both Barenti and Afati have this. An afternoon walk through the spiny forest could produce Torotoroka scops owl. They are endemic to western and southwestern Madagascar, strictly nocturnal, and they roost in dense thickets or possibly in Didieria trees as well during the day. We may also come across these guys. We do encounter them quite regularly. The southern spider tortoise. He is critically endangered and only found in these dry habitats. Unfortunately, his habitat is decreasing rapidly. A special of the area, the banded kestrel. Some guides that I know have not seen it. I've been lucky to see it on 2 tours. They can be quite difficult. Other times they pitch up easily. He is endemic, and he shows a preference for forest edges and open woodlands, even dry woodlands like the spiny forest. They predominantly hunt small reptiles and large insects. The Madagascar nightjar is pretty much widespread throughout Madagascar, but here we often find them on day roosts sitting on the ground. They prefer forest edges, but you will not find them in deep forest itself, and they predominantly hunt small reptiles, opening their mouth and flying through flocks or swarms of insects. Here we have the Madagascan iguana, beg your pardon. They favor sparsely vegetated sandy soils in the southwest of the island, and they are insectivorous, also known as the three-eyed lizard. Madagascan button quails are actually quite regularly seen here. They're also resident in Reunion and the surrounding islands. They are typical of the grassland and grassland savanna and dry forest in this area, and they feed on seeds and insects. And if we fortunately may get grey-headed lovebird as well, another endemic believed to be introduced on other islands. They are found on the edges of forests and also in cultivated areas and disturbed woodland. They feed on fruits, grass seeds, and they're quite gregarious in groups of up to 30 individuals. The Madagascan cuckoo hawk is another endemic. They consume small reptiles, amphibians, and large insects, and are frequently solitary but seen flying in the area. There are snakes in Madagascar, but they're not venomous. All of your Madagascan snakes are constrictors, and this guy is no different. The Madagascan ground boa. Females can get up to about 3 meters or 10 foot in length, and are an ambush predator, hence the cryptic coloration on the body. White-browed owls are quite common around this area, although rare through the rest of the island. They tend to be in a variety of these forested habitats, and they're very common in the dry deciduous forests where we are. They probably rely very heavily on their sight at night to hunt. Of course, during a night walk, you're going to come across more chameleons. This is a warty chameleon. It's probably the third biggest, nice spines on the back, and he measures in at about 56 centimeters. We may also come across macaques, Madagascan ground gecko. They're mainly terrestrial, and they like dry habitats and are completely nocturnal. And then if we're lucky, white-footed sported lemurs, they are endemic as well. They're confined to dry habitats, particularly spiny forest and gallery forest. They're entirely nocturnal. And because their diet is so poor with leaves from the Didiaria and tamarind trees, they are inactive for long periods of time, particularly between feeds. The next morning, we go out and look for Madagascan sandgrouse. They prefer open wooded plains and sparsely vegetated ground with easy access to water, and they'll be feeding on seeds and insects in these areas. And then making our way back into camp for breakfast, we'll encounter these. The ring-tailed lemurs are the flagship of Madagascar, and they're pretty much terrestrial, moving between their different parts of their habitat, and they believe the terrestrial behavior of them is because of the arid environment that they're within. They have the broadest range, visiting both spiny, deciduous, and gallery forests, and they have also quite a varied diet: fruits, leaves, flowers, bread off your table, maybe a piece of fish or steak. Just depends whether you're paying attention or not while you're sitting and having your meal. They occur in large groups of 15 and even up to 30 individuals, which are female dominated, and the males, although they have a hierarchy between themselves, the alpha female and her ladies are all dominant over males. Of course, we also see the dancing sifaka and the Varroa sifaka. They are endemic to south and western Madagascar. They occur in dry deciduous and gallery forests, and they are the most widely distributed Propithecus. They are completely diurnal, and the problem with them, the reason they dance is because you see those bottom paws, they cannot walk because their toes are designed to grip branches. However, put them in a spiny forest and they'll jump between these spiny trunks and grab onto them without getting stuck by a thorn. However, it's fascinating watching them do their dance, balancing out to their arms. After breakfast, we head into the gallery forest in this area. The gallery forest is along the Mandreri River. About 200 hectares of closed canopy forest is available to us to explore, and it's dominated by tamarind trees. Within the tamarind trees in this area, we may find France's sparrowhawk. They are relatively widespread throughout Madagascar in forest habitat, and they hunt particularly in the lower strata, looking for small vertebrates and birds up to the size of a common myna. The Madagascan green pigeon is resident in the wooded and forest habitats along the east coast. They will even go into the dry spiny forest, and they're frugivorous, often meeting up in groups of about 20 individuals to feed on fruit. One of the main mammal attractions is the Madagascan flying fox. These guys are found in groupings of up to 7,000 individuals roosting in the canopy of a tree. Incredible amounts of activity in the tree while they're roosting. As this mammal is sitting at the moment, his wings are open. It's early morning and they're warming up. As the day progresses, they'll lick their wings to cool themselves down, and that evaporates, basically cooling the body. Basically, they spend all day roosting, and then they go out to forage at night, and they locate their fruits by sight. They bite the fruit, squeeze out the juice, and spit out the pulp unless it's a soft fruit. Hook-billed vanga is next on the list, and they occur in a variety of forest habitats. They eat large insects and small vertebrates, and for anyone that has been to places like South Africa or into Africa, they resemble the bushshrikes. The grey-headed bushshrike, for example, looks very similar in terms of shape and design of the bill. They eat also small chameleons and mouse lemurs, and are normally solitary. This is a bird that's very, very difficult to see. And again, I know a few people that have been in and haven't seen it. This is the Madagascan sparrowhawk. They are near threatened, and they are often found here hunting small birds, which they hunt from a concealed perch and then chase them through the habitat. We then get another kur. The giant kur is endemic as well to this area. They are found in deciduous forest and gallery forest with large trees and sparse undergrowth. Their diet consists mainly of moths and butterflies. Of course, once again, we get the chance to do a night walk. And the red and grey mouse lemur is something that we'll find quite regularly in these forests. They have a variety of forests they go into, but they particularly like spiny and gallery forest, and they eat a variety of fruits, insects, and also gum from trees. Carpet chameleons are also found within the gallery forest. They're a medium-sized chameleon, about 25 centimeters or 10 inches. The next morning, we have a final opportunity to encounter some of the species. This will be the last time that we may see some of them. And the ring-tailed lemurs, we often get in this position, what we refer to as sun gazing or sun worshipping. The main reason they do this is they're right down next to a river. The temperature can get quite cold, and they come out to enjoy the sunlight on their body. From this area, we make our way across to Tulia on the southwestern side of Madagascar. Once we arrive in Tulia by flight, normally a 30-minute flight if we're lucky to get it from Fort Dauphin, we make our way north to Ifati. The road thankfully has been surfaced and it's a really quick drive in going up there. But before we do that, we visit a small calcium-based table mountain just to the south of Tulia. And here we'll possibly find Madagascan lark. They're endemic and found right across in virtually every habitat in Madagascar, feeding on a variety of seeds and insects on the ground. The Verreaux's cua, another endemic and restricted to southwest Madagascar. They favor sub-arid conditions and also are normally solitary. It can be very difficult to locate. The red-shouldered vanga, another specialty of the area. They tend to like dense spiny euphorbia scrub on calciferous substrate. They were only described in 1997 as a full species, and they are insectivorous and sometimes join mixed flocks. Then a widespread species, the Chabert's vanga. They occur in all forests and woodlands, but are most prominent here in the west, not so much in the evergreen forest to the east, and they feed primarily on small vertebrates and arthropods. The Malagasy turtle dove we may encounter. They like the edge of human habitation and degraded woodlands, often looking for fruit and seed as we travel through this area. And then we'll begin our traverse north to Ifati, and we come across some salt marshes as we head north, and also a salt works. Here, this vulnerable Madagascan plover is often found. They have a preference for shallow brackish water and marshes and coastal grazed lands, and they believe that they may feed on crustaceans, mollusks, and arthropods. We may also get Baylands crake. They're pretty much widespread through Asia, Indonesia, Africa, and Southeast Australia, but this is just one of the best places I have seen them. They like the muddy habitat here with dense reed beds around the edges. And then we go on to Ifati and Park Musa, where we'll do a night walk if we have time. And we'll find the second largest chameleon in terms of weight, but the largest in terms of length, the Austerlitz chameleon. He measures in at 68.5 centimeters. Pretty big chameleon. The radiated tortoise is also occasionally found here. They are critically endangered, and their population trend is unfortunately decreasing because of the trade in these reptiles. The oldest recorded specimen is 188 years old. Another individual that we may find, a very cool little guy, the lesser hedgehog tenrec. They are part of a monotypic genus, and they are endemic to the south and southwest and are confined to dry, deciduous, gallery, and spiny forests. They are completely nocturnal, and in this case, late afternoon he was seen, and they are semi-arboreal and incredibly agile, climbing through trees. They forage alone in dense shrubbery, and if they get approached by a predator, they roll into a ball like a hedgehog would. No tour would be complete without a Madagascan hissing cockroach. It's one of the largest cockroach species, between 5 and 7.5 centimeters or 2 to 3 inches. They are wingless and they feed primarily on vegetable matter. The only member that hisses in the family by expelling air through the fourth segment spiracles on their body. This guy is also a cooler guy, a conehead katydid. They are a wingless species and they're endemic to Madagascar, but there's very little information other than them. They are often referred to by the local guides as Kung Fu cricket or cricket Kung Fu. The next morning we head into the Ifati spiny forest. We'll see quite a few of these baobabs. Madagascar is home to 7 of the 9 baobabs, 1 each for Australia and Africa. Bats pollinate them, coming to the flowers at night. As we arrive there, sucker larva weavers are a constant. They are found in the open country and they are primarily granivorous. The locals, though, like them because they deem weavers in the village as a sign of good fortune. We set off immediately and go after a ground roller. The long-tailed ground roller is found throughout these spiny forests on sandy soils. They are exclusively terrestrial, feeding on invertebrates, and they run powerfully. Now, what these guys will do is they'll move the bird up to you so you can see it, and then we leave it to go back to its day-by-day activities. The next specialty of the area is the sub-desert mesite. They're also vulnerable and range restricted to these spiny forests. They live in small groups in mature spiny forest, and they avoid areas that lack shade and have rich leaf matter. They mainly feed on terrestrial invertebrates and vegetable matter. The archbold Newtonia is endemic to the southwest spiny forests. They're insectivorous and forage in twigs and foliage, regularly in mixed feeding flocks. And then my bane of existence, the Lafresnae zvanga, often hear them calling, go running, they disappear. They are endemic and range restricted to this habitat. They feed on a variety of invertebrates and small vertebrates quite close to the floor and low down in the vegetation, normally solitary or in pairs. The running kua is also endemic to this particular habitat and terrestrial, feeding on insects. Then the Thamnornis is a strange little guy, very long bill, he probes branches and things, but quite confiding. Also confined to these dry spiny habitats and forages low down in dense vegetation. As does this particular individual, the sub-desert scrub warbler. He is also range restricted to these spiny forests, and he forages in low cover. And then we get a more common species, in fact, very much more common, the olive bee-eater. He's found from Madagascar all the way through to East Africa and Western Angola. They're found in riverine, woodland, and open country, and they feed primarily on Hymenoptera, so bees and wasps, and they take them on wings and short flights. The striped-throated jerry is another endemic. He inhabits a wide range of forest and woodland, and they take insects off the foliage and are normally in mixed species flocks. We then come back down to Tulia after our trip to the Fati spiny forests, where we will head out to Nusi Bay Island. But we get there on zebu carts, the local cattle called zebu, and they are their hard-working animals. They take us out to our boat over the mudflats, and we arrive in paradise. This is Nusi Bay looking out onto the ocean. It is a small island, and it is home to red-tailed tropic birds. These guys are distributed across the Indian Ocean, the Tasman Sea, and the Pacific Ocean, and they feed offshore by plunging into the water and taking fish, particularly flying fish and squid. On the island itself, they nest under dense cover, which is pretty cool. You can get quite close. Crab plover is also often found on the island at the right times of the year. They are a monotypic family, Dromedidae. The species itself is normally found all along East Africa and Southern Asia. They breed in the Northwest Indian Ocean islands, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea. And they move down through to East Africa and Madagascar in November and April. They predominantly feed on crabs, crustaceans, and bivalves, and other intertidal invertebrates. The Saunders tern, a very similar situation. They breed in the Red Sea and they winter in Tanzania and Madagascar. They're resident along coasts, estuaries, and tidal lagoons, and they feed on small fish, mollusks, and they hunt by plunge diving. Once we are finished on the island, we make our way just across a short little bay and into Anakau. We will have a fish lunch, and at the camp we will find a littoral rock thrush. They are an endemic range-restricted species that are often associated with spiny forest, and they consume berries, fruit, and insects on the ground. The afternoon is occasionally at leisure, and we get the chance to head back into Tulia, where we can occasionally find market days. In this case, you can see the population moving about, buying freshly cooked meals, buying wood for fires, and also buying vegetables. The thing with Madagascar is that the income per capita is $400 a month. You know, a dream of a fridge is just that, it's a dream. Only the richest people have it. Basically, these guys go to these markets daily and they buy fresh fruit, veg, and even fresh meat, which they'll take home and cook their meal on that day. From there, we make our way up towards Isalo, stopping on the way at Zombitse Forest. It's quite a long drive, so you are quite happy to stop at Zombitse because you'll be quite wary by the time you get there. But here I've had the best sightings of cuckoo roller. The cuckoo roller is a fantastic bird. He has no evolutionary links at all to rollers and cuckoos, despite the name. They are found pretty much throughout the eastern side of Madagascar. And they occupy an array of wooded habitats, and they're largely carnivorous, eating arthropods and reptiles. The guy that we come here for, though, is a very rare and highly localized Apert's tetraca. They are vulnerable, with only 2,500 individuals remaining, and they feed on arthropods in groups of 8 individuals, really low to the ground, like ankle height. We then make our way towards Isalo. The Isalo sandstone formations are absolutely beautiful. They are basically surrounded by grassland, which has basically come into play because of the habitat destruction. The Madagascar hoopoe, another individual that we find quite often in these areas, favors dry open country and is strictly insectivorous. And then the Madagascar partridge, a really special bird that we find in these grasslands. They've adapted incredibly well to moving through the grasslands, eating seeds, berries, and roots. From there, we've got a long day of driving through to Ranamafana, back on the eastern highlands and into montane forest. And we'll be driving for a full day to get there, passing through typical town scenes. And we may get lucky with a Madagascar harrier. Once again, Madagascar harrier is an endangered species. They're distributed across Madagascar to the Comoros, and they have a wide and varied diet of birds, reptiles, and rodents. And they're caught low over vegetation, basically looking for their unsuspecting prey before dropping on them. They estimate the entire population is about 250 mature individuals. We then arrive at Ranamafana. You can see the difference. It's a montane forest, very steep sides and deep rivers. Our morning start here will allow us to basically find forest rock thrush as we head up onto one of the ridges. They're endemic and found along the eastern forests. They have a preference for the montane and evergreen forests with streams and wooded creeks. These guys are pretty cool. They're unmistakable. The Milne Edward Sifaka. They live in groups of up to 9 members and are diurnal and arboreal, moving really rapidly through the trees above you. Then we come across our next ascites, the yellow-bellied sunbird ascites. They're vulnerable, patchily distributed across their range, but they are found in rainforests, normally in the canopy of the trees where they feed, and they're primarily nectar feeders. The final ground roller, the rufous-headed ground roller, I've had great success here. They're the smallest ground roller. They are near threatened, they're range restricted, and they are found in dense thickets with rotten fallen logs, damp soil, and deep leaf matter, and they're almost completely terrestrial as well. To break away from the gaudiness of the ground roller, we have the cryptic warbler. They're endemic and range restricted to these humid forests and often found up on steep ridges near bamboo. They also like epiphytes and moss and lichen wherever it's plentiful. The near-threatened Pollen's vanga is up next, and they feed on a variety of invertebrates and vertebrates in the upper canopy, and often with mixed foraging flocks. And then we come across these guys, the giraffe-necked weevil. The extended neck is an adaptation to allow them to build their nests and also when fighting with each other. The greater bamboo lemur is one of the 25 most endangered primates in the world. They're endemic to the montane forest, particularly where there's giant bamboo, which their dentition is specifically designed to be able to break open and feed on. Literally, their strong jaws decimate the bamboo, and it makes up about 95% of their diet. The velvet ascites is an absolute stunner of a bird, mind-blowing. They are mostly frugivorous, and they tend to also take a few invertebrates and nectar when it's available, and they forage all the way through all the strata from ground up to the canopy. This guy, brown mesite, they get herded up to. They normally down steep valleys with dense leaf litter and saplings, and they come up and walk past you on the pathway. They tend to take invertebrates and seeds and are often in groups of 2 to 3 birds. The hensed goshawk is a near-threatened endemic to Madagascar with a very small population, and they primarily inhabit the forests, hunting large forest birds up to the size of guinea fowl and even woolly lemurs. The ring-tailed mongoose, Malagasy ring-tailed mongoose, is the commonest and widespread mongoose. They are diurnal and are equally at home on the ground as they are in trees, and they're also depth swimmers, and their diet includes lemurs, small mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. We do have a chance to get a night walk with some more chameleons and lizards, and this is a 40 centimeter long O'Shaughnessy's chameleon. The red mouse lemur is also found up here. These guys are endemic to the rainforests, often feeding low in the understory for fruit and flowers, and nectar. Here they have feeding stations for them, so you get closer views of them. They store fat in their tail because in winter they aestivate and they can lose 30% of their body weight. The satanic leaf-tailed gecko, a really incredible species. Unlike the other leaf-tailed gecko we saw earlier, they are large, or these guys are small. They tend to use branches to camouflage themselves, and their tail is camouflaged like a leaf. The blue-legged chameleon is another large chameleon, 40 centimeters as well, and is found along the eastern forests. From there, we have a long drive back to Antananarivo. It takes us about 12 hours with traffic and the road conditions. And we may come across dimorphic egrets. These guys are distributed across Madagascar into the outlying islands of Comoros and Seychelles, and also into East Africa. And they frequent at fresh and brackish water sources. Once we've arrived in Tano, we make our way up towards Mahajanga and Ampijora, hopefully flying there. It's a very long drive, otherwise of 12 hours of boring road. Basically, our route takes us from Mahajanga down to Ampijora and the Ankara-Fantsika forests. It's a nice scenic drive, particularly the end parts of it. And when we arrive there, we come across Madagascar magpie robin. They're endemic, widespread, in all major habitats, and they feed on arthropods, either singly or in pairs. Another very common species is the crested drongo. They're the second most common passerine, and they readily take insects and associate with bird foraging parties. In fact, these guys are the ones I would look for in any forest because they lead the birding parties. In the camp, we get cockerels sifaka. They are diurnal, and they live in groups of 3 to 10 individuals, feeding primarily on mature leaves, and they spend 40% of their day feeding. The sickle-billed vanga is the largest and most morphologically distinct vanga. They occur in groups of up to 30 individuals, consuming insects by using their bill to probe into the branch and crevices and leave off bark. A typical habitat, the Ankara-Fantsika forest, is dry deciduous forest with a very well-developed understory, 1,250 millimeters of rainfall or more, with a canopy of 10 to 15 meters high, or 32 to 49 feet. And it's really easy to see things like Malagasy paradise flycatcher here. They're widespread and resident in all forests, primarily aerial hunters. The crested kua is another individual that is endemic and has a wide tolerance of all habitats, and they take a lot of food, including tree sap. Then you come across collared iguanas. They're the largest of 6 species of iguana, and they are arboreal, and they consume a largely carnivorous diet. The white-headed vanga is endemic to Madagascar, except the interior, and it's found in all native forest types, and they feed on invertebrates and small vertebrates and fruits and seed, often with mixed flocks. Then the final asceti, the Schlegel's asceti, is endemic, restricted to these northwestern forests, and they are mainly frugivorous, taking things like insects and nectar when it's possible. The white-breasted mesite is also vulnerable and found in these forests, normally belting across the tracks, so getting a photograph like this is incredible. They are endemic to Madagascar, and they are mainly small adult, they mainly eat small adult and larval insects. They gather food from the leaf litter on the floor. Then the long-billed Berniaria is another endemic. He feeds on arthropods, and he's normally mixed in groups of about 10 of these guys with mixed other species. Then we come across the endangered Van Dam's vanga. So we go up onto the plateau, about 100-meter change from the Schlegel's asceti to this guy, and you will not get either of them in either forest. Now, these guys are range restricted. They inhabit dry deciduous forest, and they're usually solitary or in pairs. They often join up with other vangas, like this Rufus vanga. These guys are popular in the understory where large trees are found, and they tend to sit and wait for prey to walk into the path before they nail it. The cockerel's kua is another species that is found on the deciduous forest floor, often taking arthropods and some fruit. And then we have an afternoon boat cruise on Lake Ravelobe, where we can get Malagasy kingfisher on any fresh body of water, looking for fish, frogs, and crustaceans. The Malagasy kukel, another individual that we can also find in the Seychelles and the Comoros. They like dense vegetation on the edge of water, and they are voracious predators, feeding on arthropods and small vertebrates, including chameleons. And then the main attraction here, the critically endangered Madagascan fish eagle. They are endemic to coastal western Madagascar. They're the largest raptor on the tour. They are predominantly found in large water bodies that are deep and clear, and they hunt fish on the surface. The Humboldt heron is also found here, as well as down on the Tunuse Bay, best seen here. They are endangered. They like fresh, brackish, or saltwater systems, although they show a preference for tidal zones and lakes, and they mainly eat medium to large fish. We do have an ideal western woolly lemur that like groups of up to 4 members. They're almost exclusively nocturnal, as well as the rhinoceros chameleon, up to 27 centimeters, is a medium-sized individual. The golden brown mouse lemur is also restricted to the northwest dry deciduous forest. They're nocturnal and move quickly from branch to branch by jumping between them, and they take fruits and insects readily. Our final stop is up in Mahajanga, where we jump onto the Betsiboka Delta. This is Madagascar's main river, about 525 kilometers long, or 326 miles. It concludes in the Indian Ocean in a wide mangrove-edged estuary. The red attractive sediment is a sign of the massacre of Madagascar's forests, unfortunately, with deposition of silt. Here we look for the endangered Bernier's teal. They're known to like these mangrove areas and during the dry season, and they forage mainly for aquatic and terrestrial insects, and they were not known until the 70s. And then the Malagasy sacred ibis, which is endangered, but their population is stabilizing. They feed on the saline and brackish coastline, feeding mainly on invertebrates. We then go to a small lake nearby where we may get Madagascan jacana. They are near threatened, and they like floating vegetation where they feed on insects. And in this guy, the Madagascan manakin is one of the last species that we tend to see on the tour, right up drinking at these lakes. They come up before going to grasses, normally in groups of 50. Nice sunset over Mahajanga before we make our way back to the capital. Now, there are a couple of opportunities to go north from Antananarivo to Lake Matsaborimena and also to Masawala. In Masawala, there's a stopover to get the ii, a really specific and incredible species of lemur. They're very adaptable. They have an unusual dentition, which allows them to feed with permanently growing incisors, very large ears, and a skeletal long middle finger, which they use to dig in to get crevices and gaps. They're regarded as an omen of evil with a lot of the local cultures. The local population may kill one of these if they come into their village, or alternatively burn down their village if it comes into it. They are completely nocturnal and solitary. That's what Masawala looks like, another rainforest. In Masawala, you'll come across Bernier's vanga, an endangered species, range restricted to the northeastern forest. They feed on arthropods and small vertebrates. And then another special, probably one of the top 100 birds in the world to see, the helmet vanga, is often found nesting in Masawala, and they're quite happy with us staying back and just watching them as they go about their activities. They forage in the mid-strata for arthropods and small vertebrates and are generally solitary. Another special is the red owl. They are vulnerable and range restricted. They're linked with undisturbed forest. They roost in small ravines and among ponds, and that's where they often find them. And then our last bird, the Madagascan pochard, is a special. They are range restricted and found only on a volcanic lake. Basically, they're originally believed to inhabit freshwater lakes, but they were believed extinct from 1960 until in 2006 they relocated the species on a volcanic lake with no emergent vegetation. They are believed to eat exclusively insects, and there's not much of that there. Unfortunately for them, the population has only increased slightly by about 20 birds since the original identification of them, but there are massive projects in place to try and build them up. Just a thanks to Karen and Russ in particular for this one. They were the inspiration for me getting to Madagascar and finding a Darwin's orchid for them. I'd also like to thank all the photographers that contributed to this, and to Nikki, Keith, and George for their help in setting these up. And thank you for listening. Thanks for the support, and I hope to see you in Madagascar.
Oh, Greg, thank you so much. Amazing. Your photos are just absolutely beautiful. Before I hand you over to George for Q&A, just a reminder, these webinars in the series are all being offered free of charge, and should you, however, wish to donate towards our tour leaders, our GoFundMe donation link is still open. Next week, Wednesday, we travel to Spain with Rob Williams, a popular destination offering a pleasing array of Mediterranean habitats. This destination is marked by beautiful scenic sites in lovely rural areas that are way off the beaten track. Rob Williams details these magnificent areas as well as some of our most hopeful target birds. Fabulous birds dot the landscape, including specials like the Spanish Emperor eagle and 20 plus raptors, while we search also for the robust, great and diminutive little bustards, as well as the alpine accenter and the tufts, white-throated dipper and the fabulous war creeper. So join Rob for a thrilling review of one of the world's best known countries and examination of our wonderful wildlife. But yeah, enough of me. George, if you've got some Q&A, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nikki, and thanks, Greg. Really fascinating to get this thorough review and virtual tour here. We do have quite a few questions. Both the chat and the Q&A were really popping. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And some of the stuff you may have covered a little bit, but it might deserve a little review or further clarification for folks. One question we had was that you were mostly covering the comprehensive tour in this presentation, right? Some folks were curious how the comprehensive compares to the highlights.
So the highlights tour, probably the main factor, you spend a little bit more time in Pyrenees through to Montadia. Instead of 3 nights, I think you got 4 nights there. We go down to Burenti to get the ring-tailed lemurs. And we do miss, I think it's the spiny forest. I stand to be corrected, but we do miss one section of the area. But yeah, generally it's a shorter tour. And it I think only operates over 15 days or so. So the highlights tour is quite a fun tour, a little bit more relaxed as well. So definitely a good tour to go on.
Cool. And one, Jennifer Fury was asking if our trips, how much of the more remote north we cover on any of our offerings.
So I know with the Madagascar Mega that they ran 2 years ago, they covered the remote north a lot more. The Massawa Peninsula, which I mentioned at the end of the talk, and then also going up further to the lake, those can be done as extensions. Last year I had guests that got specific extensions up to those. It is a remote area, so the cost is unfortunately normally a bit higher because they've got to travel and the roads getting there are exceptionally poor. A recall from one of my guests is something like a 7-hour trip after a 3-hour plane flight in a Cessna. And they got there just at sunset to see the red owl, for example. So you have to put that into perspective. But I mean, Massawa is pretty good, pretty easy to get to. And that does get quite a bit of activity, particularly for the II. So they're a little bit more flexible from that side. But yeah, generally our comprehensive tour, it doesn't go much further north than Mahajanga. It would have to be an extension.
And Ian Denholm was asking about the red owl. Is that really the only way to see that bird, is by doing an extension up into the north there?
Yes, very much so it is. So in one of the sites, they have a radio track bird that I'm aware of. As I say, one of my guests went up to the area and they've had data on this bird. They've been studying it. It is becoming more prevalent. For a long time, they thought it was a lot rarer than it is. But yeah, getting up into the north is probably the best way to do it. In fact, the Madagascar pochard and red owl are
okay. Yeah, that was another question. Folks were wondering the status and you know, how they might go about getting the pochard. So I suppose same deal as you just outlined.
Yeah, look, it's all set up. There's a new environmental area, Bemvanika. That whole area has become pretty accessible. And obviously tourism is a big thing. You know, for most of these people, they're poor, so getting a community roped in and bringing in the income to them, getting those finances out to them, it helps develop those communities. So if they can get people coming in and actually coming to see the poachers, for example, that little bit of income that those reserves make can help to conserve that species to a large degree.
Yeah, so many endangered and endemic birds in Madagascar. And while we're talking about extensions and special birds, I think 3 different folks asked about helmet and Bernier's vangas. What can you tell us about those?
All right, so I know on the mega tour, they didn't get Bernier's vanga. They are difficult. They are incredibly rare, even where they are populous. Helmet vanga, there's a much better chance. And in fact, recently on highlights and comprehensive tours, they've actually had chances of getting helmet vangas within the first 4 days of the tour. It's not a guarantee, though. It depends on what happens at Montedia. I've had horrendous luck because I'll get to Montedia and we'll have rainfall and we won't get any of the ground rollers. And you only have another day to go back and get the ground rollers. But if the guide has luck, for example, and on the first day he nails down 3 of the ground rollers, they can make a trip out to the Iaroka forest where they've been breeding, and they've successfully seen them. I think last year on 3 tours back to back, they had them at Iaroka forest. And then guests last year in Masawala, 2 days apart from each other, you've got helmet vanga on a nest. Sometimes it takes a bit of work to get to them. Sometimes it's right at the back of camp on level ground. Other times you have to go walking up hills, get quite strenuous. But I'd say it's worth going for. That bird is stonking. It's an incredible bird.
It looks like an amazing one. Yeah, no wonder everyone's so curious about it. As you might guess, Greg, folks are curious about rigor, pace, and also season. Best time to go. And what are the trips like in terms of the rigor? Is there much hiking? And what is the pace like?
So yeah, the start of the tour is probably the most strenuous. You're going into basic rainforest that has been undisturbed. Normally what we do is on a tour that I'll run, I'll walk along the road, doing much of the birding, getting the bird parties coming across. And the local guide will be off looking for the specials, the ground rollers, and he'll come back down and tell me where he's got a ground roller. And we'll discuss what the habitat is like going through there. Because invariably in rainforest, it's very wet underfoot and can be quite difficult, particularly with certain species like short-legged ground roller. They tend to like being up slopes with saplings. And if it's been raining, it can be very difficult underfoot. They can also be quite far into the habitat. So you could be doing quite a bit of bushwhacking. I walked for an hour and a half on my last tour to get to a ground roller. And I tell you what, that habitat was very difficult to get through. I mean, a lot of vines and things pulling against your legs. So the first 3 to 4 days can be quite challenging, but after that it settles down where the reserves are better maintained. They've got more defined pathways, roads, easier access. When you get to a place like Ranamafana, it's montane forest. I did allude to that slightly. A couple of steep climbs and things, but it's all on pathways. Everything's on paths. You don't go down into the valleys or into the vegetation. So generally speaking, once you're past the first 3 days, if you can stomach the first 3 days, you should be able to do it quite easily and get through. Time of the year, you're looking at the end of the year. From August, the ground rollers start getting very active in nest building, and by September they're probably getting into their first nest. And often what they'll do is they'll locate a nest site, they'll set you back a distance, and you watch these birds coming down and feeding their chicks and then going off and continuing their behaviors. And it makes it a lot easier to see these birds. Anything before that, they might not be calling, and when they're not calling, they're quite inconspicuous. Also, during that time of the year, many of your species have gone into their breeding plumage. So your foodies, your ascites, all of them are starting to get into their full breeding. And I can tell you, seeing a velvet ascite in non-breeding plumage versus that bright green eyebrow and black blob in that screen, there's no comparison. You want to see them when they're in their breeding plumage. Simple as that.
Nice. What about vehicles? What kind of vehicles do we use? I know there are some long drives in Madagascar, right? So folks who are curious about that and what kind of vehicles we use.
So probably something that most folks are used to for the long distance drives. We use coaster buses, so the Toyota coasters, very comfortable buses. Obviously a bit of something driving in those. But there are sections where we jump into 3 separate vehicles, 4x4 vehicles, and we travel in those, namely going through to Perine and Mantadia, and then going through to Ifati. But those vehicles are air conditioned and comfortable and well maintained. So that's always a good thing. But yeah, for the most part, it's in a bus. As I say, comfortable, spacious, and stretch your legs. So not too bad.
Now, Greg, you and I were talking about Vasa parrots earlier. We can spare everybody the conversation you and I had about them, but there was a question about how they're doing in the wild. Cheryl Rutherford mentioned that she lived with a greater Vasa for quite a long time, quite a number of years. Was curious how they're doing, how they're received by the people in Madagascar.
Well, look, like with most parrots, they are very adaptable to their environment. They manage to survive where others probably won't, and they're quite adaptable to human habitation as well, which I think helps a huge amount. The population has been steady. There's not very much going on at the moment in terms of declines or anything from their side. The helping hand is that even the lesser Vasa parrot, which generally is almost restricted to that eastern forest, they're still able to adapt, and they've been seen in the spiny forests, for example, down in Barenti. So it's not like they cannot move about and get to different habitat types. The species that are going to struggle are going to be those ones that are relying completely on the habitat types that are under the most pressure. So yeah, those parrots are doing well. They're actually succeeding pretty well.
Cool. Just to, I know we're running up against some time here, but was curious, your favorite sites, Greg, and your favorite Madagascar birds?
Well, I love the spiny forests. Ifati, Park Musa, those spiny forests, and that experience, hands down. The subdesert me site, an incredible bird, the long-tailed ground roller, and because I'm a bugger for punishment, that Lefresnae's Vanga. I will chase through that bush every single day and be torn to pieces to get that Lefresnae's Vanga. Hands down, no hassles.
That a guy. And how many times have you seen Vasa?
I unfortunately haven't. I've tried.
Yeah.
We had a sighting from some guys that were ahead of us on one of my tours. Got there and the thing was gone. But then on the mega tour, they had, I think, 3 sightings, one of a mating pair of fossa. If you get them in the mating season, they're quite vocal and often easily located, but it's luck. It just comes down to luck.
Yeah, a lot of interest in those as well from folks. So thanks so much, Greg. Fantastic stuff. And yeah, Nikki, I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you, Greg. And that is a wrap for today. And we hope to see you next week. So from all of us from the Rockjumper team, we hope you have a great day and week, and we see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Bye.